Hello, Cleveland, and welcome to another edition of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jackson McCurry. Joining me again is Jack Duffin from the Dogland.com. Jack, how's everything going, buddy?
I'm doing great. Exciting time of the year. It's been a bit slow at the weekend. I want 7 days a week Browns news. So, yeah, hopefully something happens.
Yeah, Saturday was so boring, and I even tweeted it out. I was like, man, this is a boring day without Browns news. And of course, Lane Adkins from the OBR quickly chimed in. He goes, I'm okay with this. But I know those guys have been killing it all week with coverage and rumors and everything. But yeah, I mean, the Browns were busy this week. They were even, more busy Friday. Me and Anthony, I think, are recorded Friday, and then more moves have been made. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then, Jack, you wrote a great article over at the dogland.com that we'll break into. But yeah, Friday, the Browns added 3 more players back to the roster. So we'll start off right at the top. Cody Parkey's back. And I even mentioned right before they re-signed him, I was like, we don't have a kicker yet. That was like the one thing on the roster that we were missing, but the Browns brought him back. And it was a relatively cheap deal and even very little guaranteed.
Oh, it's an absolute shade on, is it Matthew McRae?
Yeah.
Who was on the roster. There was a kicker, Jack.
They're
real people.
Yeah, I mean, he was on the practice squad. I forgot about him.
But yeah, he's no guarantee to make the roster, so they're smart to give him a 1-year deal because even Justin Tucker had a bit of a wobbly last year in the playoffs. So if you think Cody Parkey's worth a 3-4 year deal where you're going to guarantee a load of money, it's just nuts. So yeah, keep them short. He's not even guaranteed the 1 year. They'll bring him in for camp, and then it's go out there and compete. They'll probably, I don't know if McRae will be the guy. I think there'll be a UDFA that they probably bring in, because the advantage of that, if it's someone that's good, they've got him for 3 years dirt cheap. So you just bring him in, see what happens, and I think that'll be their direction. So I don't think McRae's going to be the one. Parkey could easily stay as the one, and then if he has a couple of bad weeks, he's out on the street and you just bring in another one. It's just the way I think they're going to view kickers.
Yeah, I mean, he did have some very, questionable games last year, but like down the stretch, the Pittsburgh game in the regular season and the playoff game, he was perfect. I mean, there was nothing. Parkey ended up being solid for us. Nice having that veteran presence, a guy that's kicked in those situations. He was perfect. They only guaranteed $62,500 according to Over the Cap, and if they do cut him, it's a $200,000 dead cap hit. So it's relatively cheap, low risk, high reward. No problem bringing him back. Like I said, veteran presence, has kicked in pressure situations, obviously, before throughout his career. So not a bad move at all. The Browns went and then signed Anthony Walker, linebacker, who they brought in for a visit. 1 year deal, $3.5 million is the total he can make. We don't know the details yet, but shockingly enough, a Drew Rosenhaus client. Because, we always say like, oh, Rosenhaus has this agenda against the Cleveland Browns, always trying to milk them for money. But getting a guy like Walker in here, people were wondering, like, the BJ Goodson angle, would we bring him back? But this is a similar type player, especially like you mentioned on your podcast, Jack, a lot of the athletic traits very similar to what Goodson brought to the table. And shockingly enough, a lot of people didn't talk about this. Everybody talks about Darius Leonard in the Colts linebacker room, but it seems like Walker was like the leader, not only of that linebacker room, but also the Colts defense. So very interesting signing. We finally got a linebacker, so that should quiet the fan base a little bit. But a very interesting signing because Walker was nobody, or as a person that nobody talked about when they were looking at free agent linebackers. But very interesting signing, and could be a leader for a very young linebacker room here in Cleveland.
Yeah, so it's one that, as you said, the athletic comp to Goodson is incredible. It's how close it is. We're not just talking one or two things. We are talking literally every single test at the combine. They're ridiculously similar. And it's also, forget last season, because if you look at something like PFF, Walker did have a bad year last year. There's no sort of covering that over. But if you go back a year and then go back to not Goodson's year he's just had, the year before Goodson arrived with Joe Woods, they're very similar as well. So it certainly is their BJ Goodson signing. Is he going to light up the world? No. Is he getting about 50% of the 5 linebacker budget? Yeah, but quite frankly, I've got no issue with one person getting 50% of the budget when you're keeping the whole room under 7 million. So it's not the end of the world. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. So I think the main reason why it's a 1-year deal, because they still have a lot of hope for Phillips. So if Phillips steps up and is 90% of the player they hope he's going to be, Walker's going to be gone. He is good at all the noises, positive leader, and that's what we heard about Goodson. Stefanski dubbed him the leader of the defense. He didn't need to have a bag to be a leader and step up. And all the positive noise was, he's doing stuff. I think it's still going to be one where they're going to rotate and do different things, because quite frankly, every other move we've seen this offseason is setting up for a dime defense that will play some nickel. I don't think we're going to see that much 3 linebacker set. So yeah, it's looking like a nice room that I just feel this entire team is set up every single season to draft a linebacker between the 3rd and 5th round. And I think that might just become a stable for this front office, because they're not interested in probably paying any of them. And then you can just cycle through. And eventually, when you've got a proper line going through, you won't even need to spend $3.5 million on somebody. You'll probably bring in one vet at like $1 million, and then you've got 4 dudes on rookie deals, and you just cycle them through. So no, it wouldn't surprise me if we get down to $5 million a year next year rather than the $7.5 million this year.
Yeah, I mean, barring injury, I don't think we will see a lot of 3 linebacker sets like you mentioned. But I think Walker will be a positive influence on the linebacker room, specifically Jacob Phillips. I seen Jake Burns tweet on Saturday. He goes, if Walker can be a positive influence on Phillips, and we see the potential in Phillips that we've seen so far, that Walker being added to the room will do wonders for Phillips. So hopefully that one works out. It's a relatively cheap deal, but like you said, he's making half of what the whole linebacker room makes, which is crazy. But I mean, that just also shows what the Browns and Joe Woods think of the linebacker position, as long as Woods is the defensive coordinator. The one move that they made Friday night, which kind of surprised me because we did not even mention this guy's name when we were talking about potential defensive lineman additions, was Malik Jackson. It was a 1-year deal, worth $4.5 million in total value. But, he got cut by the Eagles on Wednesday when the new league year started, I think because of, cap purposes and everything. But, Malik Jackson has been a solid player throughout his career. I seen the stat 8 out of 9 seasons in the league, he's had double-digit QB hits. Doesn't get the sack numbers, obviously, but that's just one thing that everybody kind of looks at immediately. But he's a productive player. We needed to add someone to the defensive tackle room, but obviously we were looking at guys like Sue, Jarrell Casey, Solomon Thomas was a name that we both had our eyes on when free agency started, but he obviously signed with the Raiders. But a solid addition. He's still only 31 years old, was injured the last couple seasons, but a productive player and another solid piece to the Browns defensive line.
Yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting one to see when that deal comes out, because what happens is we've heard it's $4.5 million up to. It's the agents that are pummeling out all this information, so they want that deal to sound as good as it can possibly be. It could actually be like a $2.5 million deal with $2 million in incentives, one for like playtime and one for sack numbers. So that's going to be the really intriguing thing once we get that, because if you'd have told me straight up, it's $4.5 million, it's basically fully guaranteed, then I'd have said, Richardson's gone. Just because if you're looking at him at 3 tech, Richardson starting, him in rotation, depth behind, then you're sat there going, are they really going to spend 9.5% of their budget on a starter and his backup? No, not really. They could obviously do some interesting stuff. Both can play a little bit of edge if you wanted to on sort of heavy sets. But it's one that I genuinely don't know what the direction is, because the answer could be, hey, we want to go get a Sue, we want to go get a Casey. Say Sue's going to cost them $6 million, and they go from Richardson at just over 13 to they bring in Sue at 6, Malik Jackson at say 4, and they go, we've saved $3 million. Not only have we got a starter, we've got the depth piece as well. So if I'm Richardson, I am really squeaky bum time here. you genuinely don't know if you're hanging around. It could be that they wait all the way till the draft and maybe Barmore pops up and they just sign Barmore and then literally get rid of Richardson the same night as the draft. We've really got no idea, but it puts everything on the table now. I wouldn't have expected this much money for a backup, but at the same time, if it comes out it's actually $2.5 million deal with $2 million of incentives, suddenly we're having a different conversation. So it's not a wow move, but I can see why they might make it, especially if they're leaving Tack as the number 2 edge opposite Miles, because that gives them a little bit extra if they want to push a bit Sheldon out there, push a bit Malik Jackson out there in certain packages, or even do some crazy stuff and have like 3-man fronts.
So I did want to bring up Sheldon Richardson when we talked about your article, but since the topic's already there, Richardson obviously right now is a $13.6 million cap hit. If say they did a deal like they did with Hubbard or Olivier Vernon last year, where they reworked the whole year of their contract, how could you see that one playing out? Because I know you talked about before a potential extension with Richardson, but if they were to rework some of the money, he's making $11.9 million in his base salary right now. How would they restructure that to where he would take a pay cut, but then still lower the cap number to where it doesn't look as bad as, we have 17 million committed to our 3 techs right now?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Lots of people have said, I'll just push the money back, but it's like that doesn't really solve the issue. the fact that if you're going to move the money into next year and then Richardson's say going to be a free agent, you've not solved the issue if you're getting Richardson now and then you're paying him say $5 million next year and $5 million this year, for when he's not on the roster. So it's hard to know. There's some incentives wrapped up in this, but we know there's at least 11.5 million. There's probably another 1.5 million hidden somewhere. That 1.5 million, another half a million hidden somewhere. But if you took that, say 11.1, 12 million, take that 12 million and go, right, it's 11.5 and half a million of incentives. Let's make that 8 and we'll put 2 million of incentives in there, or we'll make it 9 and you can stretch it to 11 if you hit all these crazy numbers. I think 8 and stretch to 10 is probably best. And it's why a lot of these players, when they're smart and their agents are on board, they will force a roster bonus in that final year, right around this free agency time. We saw it with John Johnson, and it's only like 1 or 2 million, but that forces the team to make an early decision, because the last thing you want to be is like Sheldon Richardson's position, where they can walk into that room, and here's the important thing from the team aspect: you have to be willing to cut him. If you're not willing to cut him, you can't walk in there and demand a pay cut, because if you go, hey Richardson, we need you to take a pay cut, and he goes, what if I don't take a pay cut? Well, don't worry, we're not going to cut you. He's going to go, well, I kind of like the extra 2 million you're going to be paying me. I'm not going to take a pay cut. So it's a really, really important thing when fans are like, hey, get him to take a pay cut. It's like, are you willing to cut him? No. And it's like, well, you can't ask someone to do that. So no, it wouldn't surprise me if they asked him to take a pay cut. But the issue is, if they do that, you're guaranteeing the rest of his base salary, because that's basically the trade-off. And the problem then comes down to, you've then almost taken yourself out of the Barmore stakes, because if you sat there in the draft and we've got Richardson, who you fully guaranteed his deal, you've got Billings, whose deal's guaranteed, you've got Malik Jackson, whose deal's guaranteed, you've got Elliott, who they like, and there's upside there. Well, there's all 4 of your defensive tackles signed. If Barmore's there, then you're probably not going to have 5. So it's one where it's a double-edged sword. They could obviously still ask for a pay cut post-draft, so it's not something they have to do, but it's certainly one to keep an eye on.
Without a doubt. I mean, it is something interesting, especially if they do want to add somebody else. And that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. The Browns, we're working with a number right now, hypothetically, because we don't know the details on Troy Hill, which I actually want to get your thoughts on here in a little bit. But the Troy Hill signing, Higgins, Jackson, Parkey, and Walker. We don't know the details yet, but we're working with a number of about 5 to 6 million in cap space still. Based on what we still need an outside corner, and we still need an edge. Who do you like? Do you think we're gonna go make another splash signing potentially? Say go get a Clowney or maybe a Casey Hayward, or do you think right now we're looking at probably more guys that we're gonna take chances on, like a Garyon Conley, for instance, where we just give a 1-year deal fairly cheap, and then focus more on the draft at this point?
Yeah, so it's really tough to know. And that sort of edge debate for me, there's sort of what your Clowney, your Dunlap, your Alden Smith.
Yeah.
And Melvin Ingram. They're the 4 guys that are most interest. And I just don't know what the Tack McKinley move is, and that just stumped me. I still cannot work it out whether they love him and think, hey, this dude can be the edge too, or it's a case of we want Clowney, but Clowney's not ready to make up his mind because he always takes his time in free agency. We have to get somebody to bridge us over. Could be, hey, we don't love the draft class, or we want to go a different way in the draft, so we don't want to take an edge at 26. We want to be looking at an edge in sort of the end of round 3, maybe a Peyton Turner. And it just leaves open lots of questions. So I think they're still out there gunning for someone. Clowney for me is just the one that makes sense. I know some fans are like, oh, we don't want him. He turned us down last year. That's fine. I don't think there's an emotional train wreck in the Browns front office that sit there when someone says no, they feel a sense of rejection and want to sit there and eat ice cream and sit in their pajamas all day. At corner, this is where I'm really not sure. For me, Adoree Jackson is just such an intriguing name because the high end is really, really good. And that's the sort of player that I'd love to take a bet on. And you're going, hey, Denzel Ward, Adoree Jackson, you've got Greedy Williams, you've got a sort of day 2 draft pick, and then you've got, say, either a day 3 UDFA, AJ Green, and then you've got 5 young outside corners that can play. You've got Troy Hill in a pinch. It just gives you so many options there, and that is what intrigues me. Right, I'd rather mix it up and throw loads in there, but at the same time, yeah, if Hayward, whether it's Malcolm Butler, they're 2 guys that you can give them 1-year deal. They're going to come in and do a great job, and then in theory it's more sensible to do it that way and then bring someone through. So even though a Conley I could see, I think it's more risky to go that other way. Maybe they're looking at Conley and which wouldn't be nuts to go, hey, we want to bring Gary and Conley. The issue is Conley's probably going to be, well, I don't want to sign there if you've got Butler, Ward, Greedy Williams, Gary and Conley. Is like, well, why am I taking a 1-year prove-it deal if I ain't going to chance to get on the field? So it's a really risky combination of how they work it out here, but they just need loads of bodies. If we see like the Buccaneers, some of these other teams, they just fill the room with loads of young, promising corners, and it's like, look, we're just going to throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. So I like the idea of 5 really young, talented dudes, and who knows what happens.
If you had to sign one position right now, would it be outside corner or would it be edge? Because for me, it's outside corner. Because I feel like secondary is the more need. We could take a chance on a guy in the draft at edge, but we have McKinley, we have Garrett, we have Gustin, we have Weaver. I mean, they could go out and sign Clowney or Alden Smith or somebody, but I just feel like outside corner, we can get somebody in the draft there too, but I would rather go and get a proven guy at this point. But I'd like to hear your take on it.
If I had to do one or the other, I'm going to go get Clowney, and then I'm going to draft 2 corners on day 2.
That's fair.
And that'd be bold. But at the same time, if you're bringing in 2 corners on day 2, Greedy and Ward, yeah, it's no guarantee. But to be fair, signing a Malcolm Butler, signing a Casey Hayward, they're no guarantee either. Whereas edge is a lot more stable. And coverage is always more important than pass rush. But the difference is pass rush is quite consistent. When you look at pressures and stuff, ignore sacks. When you look at pressures, Garrett is very much like you look at Garrett and you go, right, you can project and go, here, he's going to do this basically for the rest of his career. Whereas you've got corners that fluctuate. And yeah, the good corner is going to have more good years than down years. But at the same time, there is that risk there. So I would go, let's just throw as much stuff at the wall, but shore up that edge spot. That's
fair. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with going that approach either, though. But I don't know. Casey Hayward's so intriguing. Even Malcolm Butler on a year deal. I mean, even Adoree Jackson, which I can't get a read on whether he's, because there's, you heard Benjamin Albright say on Browns Daily that the Browns were interested, but you haven't heard much buzz since then. So it's kind of making me wonder, is he interested? So it's definitely something to watch. I did mention we talked about Sheldon Richardson and how to restructure his deal if he'd take a pay cut. And you wrote a great article over at the Dogland on Saturday talking about restructuring contracts and who would be the first for the Browns. You broke it down. You talked about what restructuring is, because some people think that it is a pay cut, but it's not a pay cut. And then you mentioned the most likely options for the Browns to restructure their contracts. So I'll let you talk about that, and then you talk about what players are the most likely to restructure their deal as it pertains to the Browns.
Yeah, so there's no sort of real world comp for this, so bear with me. But what a restructure effectively is when your boss comes into the room and goes, hey, we're set to pay you X amount as your salary across each of the 12 months. And they're going to go, what we're going to do instead is we're just going to pay you all this month, and then you'll work for the other 11 months, and it's all agreed. You've signed a contract, etc. And that's effectively what they're going to do. So it's very player friendly to get a restructure. They're saying, hey, we're going to give you all this money. We're not going to hide it from you. We're not going to sit on it. We're just going to pay it all straight up front. And the reason why teams like it in the NFL is because when you do that, you can spread that money across up to 5 years into the future based on how many years they've got on their contract. So player X, he's got a 3-year deal. He's got 10 million he's due this year in base salary. We can just go, right, we still got to give you 1 million of base salary because that's the minimum. We're going to take that 9 million. We're going to turn it into a signing bonus. We're going to give you that 9 million straight into your bank account. They might spread it out over a year, different payments, but effectively it's fully guaranteed he's getting it. And then for each of those next 3 years, including this year, you get 3 million show on your salary cap. So for accounting purposes, really, really good for the team. But that's effectively what you're going to do. And the key thing is you're not going to do that stuff until you're over the salary cap. Because as we're at now, the Browns aren't going to go out and take a payday loan. It's basically racking up like a credit card bill, a restructure. You don't do that until you've run out of money. So they've still got like 6 million roughly in the bank. And yeah, 10% of your annual salary. You wouldn't go out there and start taking out a payday loan from a loan shark to try tie you over for a year if you had a load of money in the bank. So it's one down the line. Yeah, if we get to sort of the start of the season, they're going to want at least sort of 3 million of cap space. And that's just because, hey, that Myles Garrett goes down injured and they have to trade for an edge. You need a little bit of wiggle room, but you can obviously create more mid-season as well. So how can they create that money, and who's sort of the names? So here's all the dudes that it create over 1 million of salary cap space, and it's 34.75 million overall. We got OBJ 9.7, Conklin 6.8, Landry 5.75, Tretta and Batonio 4 million, Keenum 2.5, Hooper 2.25. But the knock-on impact of this is, hey, it's not magic money. It's not found the magic money tree and you shake it and some more money appears. There's consequences for that. So for that 34.75 million, that's an extra 24 million worth of commitments next season. The season after, in 2023, that's an extra 10 million of commitments. And then in 2024, that is 0.75 million of commitments. So the first question is, and Jack, I'll come to you. It's finding that sort of balance, because you can do a little bit of this, but you can't do loads. It's like you got to be careful, because, hey, the Browns are well aware. You've got this dude called Baker Mayfield. You've got this other guy called Denzel Ward. You've got a chap called Wyatt Teller. They've all got to get paid. So if you start effectively the money you've got set aside for these young rookies, you start going, let's pay that all to OBJ this year. Let's pay that all to Clowney this year because you're going to sign him. Well, someone's then got to miss out in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's like looking at it right now, and obviously 2023 is when effectively the Baker and Ward, those extensions would kick in because they still got their 5th-year option next year. But right now we're looking at $47.6 million in cap space. So in 2022. So hypothetically, if you're going to start pushing money into next year, that's going to take away from cap space. And when you have to extend potentially Teller and Chubb, you have to think, we're going to push money into next year. This could decrease our chances of re-signing Chubb and Teller because we won't have the money. So that's something you have to take into account as well. So Jack, when you look at it, who would be your top restructure guy? If you're Andrew Berry and you're whoever their cap guy is, and I don't even know who it is because I'm not really familiar with the entire front office, who would be the number one guy you would go to and say, hey, we're going to restructure your contract because it is going to not only help you get more money into your bank account and your agents, but it's also going to help us out now and going into the future too?
Yeah, so the things you're going to look at when deciding this player is, hey, whose money is already guaranteed? Because if a player's contract's already guaranteed, then you're just moving into the future and you're not actually giving out any new guarantees. You're just changing the structure of it. And as well, as we touched on that, hey, there's no point creating 34.75 million space this year to then have to pay back 24 million of it next year. You want to look for someone that's got at least 2 more years under their current deal so you can push that money as far into the future, and it just spreads it out a lot more comfortably. And the other part is, hey, you're just deciding, well, what do you want to do with that player? Because once you restructure their deal, there's no money left to trade. If you trade them, you've still got to pay them their salary. So it's not a guy you would potentially want to trade in season. So whose deals are guaranteed? They've got more than next season under contract. There's 2 main guys that come to mind, and that is OBJ and that is Conklin. And the reason why I think Conklin is the dream to extend is because I don't think you'll find a Browns fan out there that would make the case that Jack Conklin isn't going to play the next 2 years as a Cleveland Brown. What happens after that? Hey, there's a healthy discussion. He's not under contract, so he's no guarantee to make the roster. But for the next 2 years, Jack Conklin will play for the Cleveland Browns. OBJ, on the other hand, well, I think every Browns fan has had that debate of what do you do with OBJ. I think it's right to give him a shot, but at the same time, if it doesn't work out, having the freedom to trade him after, say, week 4, if you really cannot get him and Baker onto the same field together functioning, needs to be something that they keep available. So for me, Conklin is your number one extension target, because if it all goes wrong with OBJ, you can just pick up the phone, someone will trade for him, and off he goes. So yeah, Jack Conklin, it just makes far too much sense. Let's take 9 million, just over 9 million of his base salary, turn it into a signing bonus. You've got 2 more full years, 2 more void years, spread that out. And that just, it's going to give you an extra 6.78 million this year of space, and that's going to be balanced out with a 2.25 next year. And then due to the signing bonus and the money speeding up, it's going to be an extra 4.5 million in 2023. But it's the only one that is glaring in your face and just saying, restructure me. Makes no difference to him, and it just works out perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, people go check out thedogland.com. Look at Jack's article. He breaks it down all perfectly, and it just makes a lot of sense. He even put together what a Conklin restructure would look like in the article. So Jack goes above and beyond to not only educate, but to help people learn about the cap and how everything works and how it can help the Browns not only now but in the long term. Jack, before we wrap things up, I almost forgot to even ask you. They signed your boy on Thursday, I think it was, Troy Hill, the guy you've been banging the table for since January when we started our offseason deep dive. They went out and got the top slot corner in the league and on the market. They got him to a relatively good deal too. So what was your thoughts on the Browns hauling him in?
I was absolutely ecstatic. It just made so much sense all off season. To go out and get PFF's number one slot corner across the last 2 years is obviously gold. You're looking at a team that we're likely to see a 3 safety base in nickel. They will rotate between them because, hey, there's going to be times when you're up against a short little quick receiver and you want a corner on that guy. It might be a time when you're against a 2 tight end defense and you want a safety like Grant Delpit on that tight end. So that's going to vary, but it gives you that flexibility. And the fact that Troy Hill can play inside and outside, yeah, he's obviously much better on the inside, but it means when you're playing dime defense, so you've got 6 DBs, you've got your 3 safeties, you've got him on the inside, your 2 boundary corners, really, really strong. But then it also means that if Woods goes, hey, I'm only going to play 40% of the time in dime, which would be really high across the league, but if he goes that, what you don't want is a slot corner that is effectively going to potentially be off the field for the other 60% of snaps, because you don't want to pay a dude that much money to then not play. So it's about having that flexibility and the fact that he can fill out on the boundary, because, hey, there might be a little corner out there, a little wide receiver that they want him to match up with. So it's just such a perfect situation. And that's why it just made so much sense to me. You've got the incredible amount of talent at a really cheap price, because if we're going to look at it, an edge isn't as valuable as a slot corner. And you can get into that coverage versus pass rush debate, but it's just there that it is the most undervalued position out of all 22 players in the NFL, and you can get them at $4.5 million a year. It's just daylight robbery.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think, and they added void years to the deal. They finally gave you some void years, Jack. That was always good. Here's an interesting thing. I just came across Twitter. Jeff Risdon from the Browns Wire. He said there were many reports that Terrence Mitchell had agreed to terms with the Texans, but still nothing official on it. He's not on the roster and hasn't been on the NFL's transaction updates either. So I know it was reported that he agreed to a deal with the Texans, but maybe he's having second thoughts. Maybe he comes back on a relatively cheap deal, and that would solve some of the Browns' cornerback depth issues. I think we all loved Money Mitch when he was here. Wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back. I mean, he was solid. I mean, he did his job during the last few years he was here, but I don't know. Got any thoughts on that?
He's solid, but it's not what I want almost. I want young, high upside players, because I want them to be great. Obviously, yeah, if you're going with, say you wanted Terrence Mitchell and then you're going to go Ward, Greedy, 2 dudes on day 2, then I can get that. Why, hey, you've got one that is steady and then you've got 4 high upside, which, yeah, I wouldn't oppose to if that's the strategy. But at the same time, if you're looking at your Adoree Jackson or your Money Mitch, I would take that risk and go with him. Obviously, yeah, it's more safe than going with a Gary and Conley. I honestly wonder what the hold up is with the Texans, because they have been very aggressive. Lots of people have made jokes about that. They've turned over half their roster, but quite frankly, that roster was bad. So I think it's a good idea of what they've done. If they like these guys, and to be fair, there's guys that we're positive about. No one's got a bad word to say about Money Mitch. No one's got a bad word to say about Mr. Thomas. There's loads of other players. They haven't gone out and spent big. They've just brought in loads of dudes. And if you're going to do a rebuild, well, what do you want? You want guys that have good work ethic and turn it around. So I wouldn't hate it, but it would have to come with 2 day 2 corners.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Texans website, and I clicked on the transaction. They haven't announced any of their signings yet. And they've signed, I think it was 25 players in free agency. They haven't announced any of them. I know they have to probably rework some of their cap issues as well. I know they reworked Laramie Tunsil's deal. I seen that reported yesterday. So they could be restructuring deals, trying to get things in a row before they announce their free agent signings. So it could be nothing, but it is something to definitely keep an eye on. Jack, as we wrap things up, do you have anything you want to plug, or plug your Twitter as you usually do?
So jump over on Twitter. Any questions, anything like that pops up, it's Jack Duffin, DUFFIN. DMs are open, so loads of you guys have reached out and asked questions. I'm more than happy to just fire them over, and then I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Obviously, you can check out Paul Brown Podcast, 7 days a week, 15 minutes. It's good fun, and we just enjoy ourselves. So we'll keep bringing out good content. We're kicking off draft season next weekend. So we've got another week of little bits and pieces before we go into the draft for a month.
Yeah, I do highly recommend the Paul Brown podcast. Listen to it. every day. It's 15 minutes. Put it on 1.2 speed, and it's only like 10 minutes. So great stuff. They're quick. They get right to the point. It's a good thing to get the day started when you want to listen to some Browns content. As for us over here at the Dogland, check out thedogland.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Dogland as well as Facebook. And stay tuned. We are expanding the podcast network. The Top Dogs is launching March 31st. Myself and Alex Hale, bringing you a bit of a different style of Browns podcast. We hope you all will enjoy. And you can follow me as always on Twitter at JackMcCurry08. And until next time, go Browns.
Go Browns.